He spent over 29 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. He was just released in May of 2021. He has a really powerful story. Mr. Eric Reddick, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm well. I'm well. Thank you for having, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Listen, I'm from West Philly. You're from Southwest Philly. Is that accurate? 58th
Absolutely.
Street? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm from like 60th and Vine, 60th and Race, a small street called Millick Street. And I would tell you, Mr. Reddick, I've covered so many stories in Philadelphia. The
Yeah.
corruption in Philadelphia is deeply, you would think it was Mississippi. It's so disturbing. It's crazy. But I want to start here. So the moment that changes your life is back in 1992. But before we get there, just tell me the young man that you were in 92. I believe you were 21 years old. That's the young man that you
Yeah.
were.
Um, I was just like, the average young guy growing up in Southwest Philadelphia, an area that had its pros and cons, its ups and downs. It was, some days it was paradise, some days it was hell, and I grew up in a household where my mother and father was there. I grew up on 58th Street. My family had a store, the neighborhood store, that sold basic cheeseburgers, cheesesteaks, hoagies, and things like that. But we was on a particular strip that that's what we call it, from 58th Street to 58th in Springfield, where everything was going on. So although I had a certain example in my house, when I looked outside my window, there was a whole nother influence upon me growing up in that area. Like I said, it wasn't. It had its ups and downs. It was very impoverished, uh, very violent. A lot of frustration, communal frustration, and things to that nature. And I wasn't a horrible child, but I had my problems.
Yeah.
You know, again, I was pulled in two directions. My parents gave me one set of standards, and then while they was working, I was being influenced by that environment. So I did I got caught up in running around in the streets with my friends, just the basic stuff, and that's pretty much the adaptation of environment basically. You
Yeah.
know,
I want to give folks some context for folks who may not know, like many cities across the country at the time. We're talking about 1992. This really is the peak of what was called drug wars in Philadelphia. So it was violent. It was crazy. I mean, I can recall, you know, gunshots. You're running for your life. I mean, it's poverty. It's drugs. It's
yeah,
not as glamorous as New Jack City. It was
right.
some real stuff, you know.
And
And
and not to cut you off,
but
excuse me. Not and to your point, that was a very good point that you made, because it was actually 92 was the aftermath of um, the prior 2 years. A lot of indictments falling, indictments coming through on organizations that they, for example, JBM, the Junior Black Mafia, that's what they call it, the courts call it. Whereas it left a vacuum in that particular lifestyle. And, when you had those type of vacuums, like you said, being enhanced violence, people trying to, again, when you have poverty, let me say this too, when we're talking about that, when you have poverty, um, lack of opportunity, the people that's growing up, young guys that's growing up, they begin to entertain other options that's available to them. And some of those options, like the game, for example, is self-destructive. But at the root of a lot of that, again, the foundation of it is, lack of resources, frustration, because of the lack of resources and things like that, racism. All these things breed in the minds of people the desire to look for other alternatives. And if you're young and you're immature, you influenced by other factors, sometimes you consider things that's later on down the line, you realize it's self-destructive, not to just to you, but the community. So again, when you talk about the drug wars, I think that has to be highlighted also, especially
oh yeah,
us addressing the root cause of these issues now today, opposed to trying to lock them up, lock them up, lock them up, because it didn't work. It just produced mass incarceration. It produced the propensity for those institutions to embrace unethical means, which results in wrongful convictions. And people wasn't listening then because there was so much going on. They were like, well, he had to do it, or this person had to
Lock them
do it.
up.
Yeah, lock them up.
Also, add a little bit of context too, and for those who've listened to the show, you know how I've spoken about this. So, on top of what was happening with drug wars in Philadelphia, this criminal and justice system was brutal. There was a prosecutor named Roger King, who was a famous black prosecutor who kind of used his blackness to lock up as many black people as possible because if he's the black guy doing it, then it really can't be an issue. And then, oh, I forgot her name. His boss, I believe she was called the
Uh,
Mistress of Death.
Lynn, Lynn Abraham.
Lynn Abraham, praised as the Mistress of Death. So I just want you all to know how predatory Philadelphia really was at the time. It was really predatory.
And to speak on that, when Larry Krasner came into office, and I always say this, it could have been anybody. Larry Krasner was the end result of the dissatisfaction of people, dissatisfaction of the people, and they wanted a different. They wanted the DA's office to go in a different trajectory, opposed to just lock them up because they seen that it didn't work. But Roger King, Lynn Abraham, they was very fundamental, mendacious elements in what Larry Krasner called a culture of corruption. And I always highlight that concept, him identifying what happened as a culture of corruption, because it really highlights the detriment of it. It wasn't a sporadic incident. Well, this cop did this. No, it was a culture. And that culture consisted of not just the police department. The police department was in conspiracy with the district attorney's office, and the district attorney's office knew they had an outlet for their mendacity, their injustice, and their corrupt policies with the court system. So they was co-defendants. It was a family. It was a family. The district attorney office, they felt comfortable because the police department felt comfortable, and the courts felt comfortable. And even the legislation. Not saying that everybody had malice that worked in these institutions, but they was caught up in the cultural momentum. So the ones that wanted to speak out, they were silenced.
I also want to add, in case folks may not know, and I've interviewed him before. Larry Krasner is an incredible DA in Philadelphia, a white dude who has gone on there and really tried to correct the wrongs of Philadelphia. And if you're listening, you all should know they've been trying to kick him out for years, and they're blaming him for crime in Philadelphia, but they didn't blame Lynn Abraham or Roger King for crime in Philadelphia in the 1990s. Like, he's trying to make a change, and they're trying to kick him out, and it's his fault why there's crime in Philly. I'm like, make it make sense.
And the thing is, I speak at certain events and certain venues, and I always warn the people, and I warn the people that's listening today, not just in Philadelphia. The politicians supposed to represent the will of the people. When you have politicians trying to, and I'm gonna try to clean my language up on this, but I'm gonna try to say it because it's
You
important.
don't got to be clean. We
Say
on
no more.
satellite radio.
Say no more. When you hear narratives trying to equate the murders and stuff that's going on to what Larry Krasner doing as it relates to these wrongful convictions that have already proven to be just that, right? What the politicians is trying to do to the people is mind fuck the people, right? So I always say, be careful, excuse my language, of political mind efforts, because that's what they doing. They plan on some people lack of political understanding on the root cause of things. They know that Larry Krasner exonerating me, exonerating Kevin Bowman, exonerating Larry Walker, exonerating Willie Stokes, exonerating Anthony Wright, and exonerating Terrence Lewis, and on and on and on. These exonerations is based not on favors or speculation. Everybody can go to the public record and see that when in law we call it the incontrovertible proof, meaning it's indisputable, it's scientific, it's not an opinion or a favor. So these cases is just the indicative smoke They say where there's smoke, there's fire is the indicative smoke of an inferno of wrongful convictions. You know what I mean? Which should have been identified when the DNA technology came out. You know, where all those exonerations was coming about based on DNA evidence, and DNA evidence only comprised of like 8% out of all the convictions. So you do like an empirical analysis on the 92, how many convictions, wrongful conviction lies within the remaining 92% that don't have DNA evidence. This is what you see now with our cases. We didn't have DNA, but we have perpetual ineffective assistance of counsel, prosecutorial misconduct. One thing the DA office had a practice of doing during those days until and still today is during their investigation, because they get amnesia on their oath for office, which tell them that they're supposed to seek justice opposed to just to merely convict. So their whole thing is, and Abraham told them, look, your job is to convict by any unethical means necessary. So what they start doing through their investigation, they'll find an inculpatory statement, put that in the file. When they see an exculpatory statement or exculpatory evidence, they hide it. But what they did was,
Riddick, I'm sorry, brother, not to cut you off, but we only have but so much time, and I want to get to your story
okay,
because I could talk about the Philadelphia system, but
okay,
forever. But we got to get to your story though. But this is really, really important stuff. Just so y'all know, Philly, do your research is crazy. But let's talk about you for a minute, brother.
okay,
So in January of 1992, your
yes,
childhood friend William Catlett is shot and killed in Philadelphia. Again, this is your childhood friend, and
yes,
then you are arrested for this incident. And the reason why you're arrested is because somebody was pressured to go down to the police station and point you out, and then because of police misconduct, you're basically charged with this crime. Mr. Riddick, how do you find out that your name, again, this is your friend who's killed, how do you
yes.
find out your name is even caught up in this crime?
Just through the neighborhood. The first time I heard that, it was the next day after William Catlett was shot and murdered. And a friend of mine was saying that a guy named Sean Stevenson, the one who falsely testified against me, said that he seen somebody on a 2015 and 20-foot balcony with a Andrew Mark three-quarter length leather jacket like man Riddick wear. So that turned into some of the victim's friends taking him down to the police station, tell him to say that I did it. I mean, so, but that was after he made three different statements. The first night when the police first came up, he said they took an incident report. He said it was three black males that ran north on 58th Street. That was his first statement. They wrote down a guy named Sean Stevenson said that. Then he went up the street and was fighting a guy. When the police came to break it up, they asked him what's going on. Sean Stevenson said his nephews did this, meaning a guy named Peanut and Hakeem. So they took him down to the police station. That was the night of the murder. So he made a 5-page statement that night stating that he seen somebody on the balcony shoot down with a rifle and shot the deceased William Catlett. They said, did you see his face? He said, no, he had a hood on his face the whole time. Now, note, Sean Stevenson was 310 feet away from where this balcony is supposed to have been at in a November night at 6:30. But he said he never seen the guy's face because he had a hood on, et cetera, et cetera. The next day, when the victim's friends took him back down there, that's when he said the guy that he said he couldn't identify was Eric Riddick, man Riddick. You
Wow.
know, yes.
And tell me about your arrest. Tell me what happens when you're arrested by
So,
Philadelphia police.
so on the 6th it happened. On the 7th, I heard that my name was involved. On the 8th, I volunteered to go down to the homicide division to let them know where I was at during that time, that I had nothing to do with it. That I don't know what happened. I was 2 blocks away, and I gave my alibi, who was there that can testify to I was 2 blocks away when it happened. Which my lawyer never introduced at my trial. After he told the jury he was going to introduce my alibi witnesses, he didn't do it. So they let me go when I went down there and gave my statement. Told them that where I was at. They let me go. 2 months later, January 10th, they arrested me. I was walking down 58th Street, and they arrested me. when they arrested me, someone had threw some drugs because they came on when they ran on the block, jumped out, guys started running, and somebody threw some drugs. They gave me that case. Um,
Oh,
I also had a firearm on me when I got arrested. Um, I was charged with that. I pled guilty to that, and I explained to the courts because I was falsely accused of this crime. My life was also in danger, became in danger because people was believing what they were saying, and at the same time living in that environment, living in that environment. One day you have a show on just that issue alone, to be able to really understand why people, carry firearms in those dangerous areas, you know, putting their freedom in jeopardy. But I was arrested. I was charged. I went to trial. I had perpetual ineffective assistance of counsel.
hmm.
My lawyer didn't do no investigation.
Mr.
Um,
Riddick, do I have this right? You had witnesses to say that you were blocks away from this crime,
yes,
and those witnesses were never even called, and there's no physical evidence whatsoever. This is
nah,
based on just one eyewitness testimony, Sean Stevenson.
yes. And to magnify that, during the opening statement, my lawyer in his opening statement told the jury that he was going to introduce these three alibi witnesses, and he gave their names, and they was in court waiting through the whole trial to be called. You know, so he told the jury two times in his opening statement that he was going to present these three witnesses to refute the state's one false accuser, who I never called a witness, never called him a witness because he didn't witness anything. Um, so he told the jury this, and the jury waited and waited and waited. And then when it was time for us to present our case, he told me we didn't have to prove no case. They had the burden of proof. I still told him that I want my alibi witnesses to be called. We actually argued that point, and then he conceded and said okay. And then he said, never forget this moment. I don't know if I blanked out, but he said, "Your Honor, we rest." And I knew I heard him say that, but it didn't register what he was saying. And he rested the case, and they took me back to the holding cell. And a day later, 2 days later, they convicted me of first-degree murder.
Wow.
But
Mr. Riddick, when you're in this trial, I mean, you're 21 years old. Are you thinking it's a wrap? That they're going to get me? I'm done.
yeah, I was so naive, and that's one of the reasons why I started studying the law. I went in the courtroom. I knew about the inequities just from where I grew up at, but I was a little naive. I was saying to myself, I know I didn't do this, so there's no way in the world that I'm gonna be convicted of a crime that I didn't do. But I didn't know the law, and therefore I didn't know the language. And I look back on it now, knowing the law. My lawyer was horrible. He sold me out. But to me, a young guy that didn't know the law, his verbiage sounded like he knew the law. But more importantly, let me say this too: the court system, although it's an adversarial process, the district attorney's office, once they see evidence of innocence, supposed to um, acknowledge that and cease pursuing a conviction where they know a person is innocent. They presented physical evidence. They presented ballistics evidence, right? That again, incontrovertibly, indisputably showed that Sean Stevenson was lying. He said that I shot this man 5 times from a 20-foot balcony. But the trajectory, the angles of the bullets that was in the deceased, all 5 of them traveled in a sharply upward direction, meaning that whoever shot him was on ground level. And it was 2 different firearms used. So they knew that Sean Stevenson was lying, but like the homicide detective Paul Rich that interviewed me said, he said he don't care, he don't know the victim. He actually used a racial slur when he said it. And he said, I
What was
don't
the
know.
racial slur?
He
What?
said, I don't know that nigga that
Wow.
died. You,
The
I don't know.
homicide detective says this to you. Wow.
His name is Paul Rich. He died since I've been home. But he said to me, and I was hoping that he would stay alive because he said something to me when he was trying to get me to lie on somebody. Um, He said he don't know it. I don't know that nigga that died. I don't know you. I just need a conviction. We want to close the case, right? And that was the momentum. That was the culture of the police department back then. That's why a lot of wrongful convictions happen. But
Wait, Mr. Riddick, let me make sure I understand this. So that homicide detective wanted you to lie on somebody else just to get his conviction. So if you would
yeah,
have lied on somebody else, it's possible you wouldn't have been behind bars wrongfully for nearly 30 years.
and that's what he said to me. He
Wow.
said to me, try to convince me, you know, to say that the two guys that actually did it. And I was telling him, I heard the same thing, but I wasn't there. I'm not going to put myself on the scene and say that they did this based on what I'm hearing, the same thing y'all hearing, the same thing they was hearing, but I wasn't there. And he told me, he said, well, listen, but you're going to take the fall on this. And by the time, and this is his exact words, he said, you're going to come home. He said, but by the time you come home, you're going to be old, broke down, and gray, right? And that motivated me over the years, just to fight my case. That was part of the motivation, you
That's
know,
terrible.
you know.
Every case he was on, even though he's passed away, should be investigated. Every single case he was on.
And see, and it's hard for me. I'm gonna say this too, Clay. It's hard for me every time I go on a show. It's very, very difficult for me just to talk about my situation because my situation is just, again, an indicative smoke. So, like, I'll speak about it, my situation. I don't have no problem with it, but the people need to understand that. And I always say I wasn't wrongly convicted. I was judicially lynched. Malcolm X once said one time, lynching by any other name is still a lynching. So I use that strong language to try to highlight the detriments of that type of devastation when the institutions that's supposed to serve the people go rogue, especially the justice system. I have 10 cases right here, right now at my desk. I have a PCRA right here. God, I'm working on this case. And these are all wrongful conviction cases that I was working on in prison. And I haven't had a break since I've been home. I'm happy to be home, but it's too many people. It's people dying that I know that was innocent, that they never had a chance to get their case redressed, and they died in prison. Yeah, I mean Bobby Sims. I can name many. Perry. I can name a multitude of individuals. So our job right now. I work out of the law firm. 3 of the individuals that work in here with me all came home from prison. 2 of us were wrongly convicted. 1 of us was a juvenile lifer, and we opened up a wrongful conviction unit in the Igwe firm, and this is what we do all day.
Mr. Riddick, I do want to say, just to make sure folks know, that you are convicted and you are sentenced to life. You're sentenced to life. Um, what goes through your soul, your spirit when you hear life?
Do you know? And this what they always talk about when I'm interviewed. It's a thing where though I never in 30 years, all the counselors in prison they'll tell you. I used to argue with them when they used to like staff us. I never called myself a lifer. Never, not one time through the whole time I was in prison. I never called myself a lifer. Um, but when I hear life in Pennsylvania, I don't like using life. I like this we call it death by incarceration. Because in Pennsylvania, there's no parole for lifers. So that means that you're going to be incarcerated to death. So we look at the word life as a euphemism, to death by incarceration, you know. And that's one of the reasons why we fight for parole for lifers in Pennsylvania also, because you have some magnificent individuals that have since reformed, that taught us. And we have a glimpse of that through the juvenile lifers. We got around 500 or 600 juvenile lifers that had life that's in society now. 99.9% of them is doing extraordinary things, community development, stopping the violence. And, that goes to what I always say, when you have virus or violence, what do you do when the virus become the antidote? You use it.
Hmm.
Once upon a time, we used to be the virus, through rehabilitation and reform. And although I'm 100% innocent, I was negatively influenced by the community and environment that I was living in. So I understand the mindset. This is why we create youth programs out here, and we know how to speak the language of that element out there. You know, So
Mr. Riddick,
yeah,
I do want to add, in '92, didn't you also lose your father?
yes, and that was like one of the most devastating things to me because my situation actually was the catalyst that deteriorated his health. He was one of those individuals that was always able to protect his family. So when I got convicted, wrongly convicted, he sat in the courtroom the whole time and watched me railroad. And I remember when I got convicted, he came to see me up Camp Hill Prison, and I seen it on his face. It was like he was like blown away that his son was just again lynched right in front of his face, and he couldn't do nothing. And he died a month later. He died a month later. That was the most devastating thing to me. That and watching my mother go through what she went through. And that's partially why I'm out here now. My mother, for example, she pounded the pavement. We had a whole movement going on to free me from my wrongful conviction that included Georgetown University, who did Making of Exonerated, Professor Mark Howard, who was like my brother from another mother, and the three students, Taylor Riddick, no relation, Kendall, and Alex. So Georgetown had become another extended family of mine. Also, the Philadelphia City Council passed a resolution while I was incarcerated, requesting the governor to pardon me because of actual innocence on record. And that was the first resolution that was passed. Meek Mill, as he came to prison, and me and him became very close. And I mentored him for those 5 months, helped him with his legal case along with his lawyers. So when he came home, when he was on a helicopter, he told NBC to come see me. They came and see me. Me and Dan Slepian became very close friends. Was an investigative reporter for NBC, and they did a story. Dateline did a story on me. And Meek Mill and the whole Rock Nation family, they joined the grassroots organization that was going on in regards to my case. And as a result, I came home May 28th, 2021.
Hmm.
You know.
I do want to ask you, we hear these years. I've interviewed folks who've been behind bars 40 years, yourself nearly 30 years. How did you survive that day by day? When you think of prison, you think violence, that's a lot of time. How did you survive?
Well, a lot of us that made it through intact, not all the way intact, because all of us is influenced by it. We just elevated our minds. Like once this happened to me, and I realized that I was lynched based on knowledge that I didn't know, particularly legal knowledge, as well as the politics that the legal system is unfortunately functioning in. I immediately, as soon as I got convicted, committed to learning and studying everything. Starting with the law. Especially once I realized that I couldn't get effective representation. And that's at the foundation of all wrongful convictions. First of all, let me say that. Regardless of the police department, the DA, the United States Supreme Court, they adjudicated like multiple times that out of all the rights that a citizen has, the right to effective representation is the most important because it's through this right that all other rights is protected or neglected. So investigation, your lawyer, if he's competent, he's going to make sure an investigation jump off. Cross-examination, effective cross-examination, um, effective adversarial presentation of exculpatory evidence, which my lawyer didn't do. It was physical evidence that he could have highlighted and showed that I was innocent based on. There's a case in Pennsylvania called Santana case, where the Supreme Court said that when physical scientific evidence goes against human accusations, then you have to reject the human accusation because physical scientific evidence lacks the capacity to lie. So if you have someone saying, "I've seen him shoot this man and kill him," but the victim is stabbed, then you have to reject that testimony. In my case, the one accuser said that I was on a 20-foot balcony shooting down, but we had a clear medical report saying that none of the bullets traveled in the downward trajectory. So they could have just like the DA supposed to rejected that testimony from the gate.
Right.
But because they didn't have integrity of their oath of office to seek justice, they want to just get numbers. And that was Lynn Abraham's, all those convictions is the brainchild of Lynn Abraham. Lynn Abraham had no issue with convicting, especially black and brown people. You know what I mean? Again, black lives didn't matter back then. You know, systematically, black lives didn't matter. So, they went, they went from 4 prisons in Pennsylvania, and only 4 prisons for 100 years in Pennsylvania. I think 4 to 6. And in 20 years, 22 prisons was built.
Mm.
And those 22 prisons was built without the bodies being there to fill those cells up. But it was already policies in place where they knew that those cells was going to be filled up. The introduction of crack cocaine, the introduction of weapons in the community, that better weapons than they have over Beirut in Iraq. A storm out of nowhere of tons and tons of cocaine.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, boom. You remember those days, out of nowhere. We don't have no bricks to build houses, but you got bricks of cocaine that can reach from the earth to the moon,
Exactly.
out of nowhere. So it was a mixture, and those prisons was built.
Mr. Riddick, we're going to get cut off soon, but so I do want to. No, this is really important. It's really important, but the radio time constraints. I do want to say that Lynn Abraham was, for folks who may not know, she was the DA from '91 to 2010. She was elected 4 times, so elections matter. So you are released in 2021,
Yeah.
but you aren't officially exonerated, which impacts you being compensated. So for folks who may not understand, Sean Stevenson, this eyewitness, recants, I believe, like 3 times, right? He said, I was forced, I was pressured, and then you plead guilty for a 3rd-degree murder charge just to be released. Is that
No, no,
right?
no. No, I didn't plead guilty. They wanted me to plead guilty after they said I was innocent. I refused. So then they came back. They were saying, well, it's going to take you 2 to 3 years to overturn the case. You want to spend 2 or 3 years in prison. So I said, I'm not going to plead guilty to a crime that I didn't do. So he came back and said, well, what about pleading no contest? And
No
then
contest.
then the DA's office said that we'll do what we do on our end, lower the degree, and then you time served, then you go home. I said, well, I'll do that, but I'm not pleading guilty as long as I still have the means to fight my conviction on the outside. And again, that was because I was seeing, that was during the COVID. I seen just on my unit alone, at least 20 people died.
Wow.
And I see my mother getting older. My family was getting older, and I realized it wasn't just my fight. I had to get home to my mother, and I still had the means to fight it because they didn't put too much on record that I'm actually innocent, and I'm still, so that's what I'm fighting now. I'm fighting that now.
And I want to tell people again, in order to get compensation, you have to be officially exonerated, and sometimes that can take years. So if folks want to donate to your Cash App, it is $ free Eric Riddick. That's free Eric, ERIC, Riddick, RIDDICK. And you, of course, are doing incredible work trying to free the wrongfully convicted. And they can go to your foundation, which is erfoundation19.com, and you can
Yeah,
help if you're able to donate. I know tough times are tough with wrongful convictions and so on.
yeah.
So go ahead, sir.
Can I say something on that too? My nonprofit, the Foundation, I do have 501c3 status. And again, we have office space, so definitely any help towards that. We're trying to get some students and some interns. We have office space for the interns. But yes, it's a fight. It's a fight that definitely need resources. Um, we also do community development, also addressing the violence. We have a safe zone project. So yeah, anyone that want to donate, um, again, we have now our 501c3 status, and it's definitely appreciated. It's definitely needed.
Last question before you go. How are you doing? Just how's your mental health? How are you?
So one thing about those of us that chose to fight this fight, we left a lot of good people behind. So this is what we do. I have to find a break. I haven't had a break since I've been home. My family get on me about that. But it's just an urgency. I know the pain when these guys call me. I get 50 prison calls a day, 50, right? And we're working on 310 cases right now. We don't have that much staff, but it's hard not to fight like hell for those individuals because I know what they're feeling. You know what I mean? I know these guys is actually and factually innocent and I can prove it. So, but at the same time, to answer your question, I know that I'm gonna have to breathe a little bit. I'm gonna have to take a break. I'm going down Miami on the 28th. I have a product called Legacy Tea Moss. So I have a tea bag product that I'm going down there to meet with James Lindy from Rap Snacks to try to close that deal with him. And that'll give me resources also to do some other things that I want to do in regards to criminal justice reform. But I definitely need a break. But fighting this fight is therapy for me. You know, that's my therapy. The guys that work with me, the guys that's on the front line, that's fighting this criminal justice, so-called justice system. This is our therapy. So that's why we didn't wait a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, to get into the fight, because we spent more time with those guys in there than we spent with our old family. So they are family members, and these are good individuals. I always say I know where buried treasure solutions are at, and it's in prison. Guys that reformed and transformed and grew. And some of the most powerful minds is locked behind those gates and those bars, and many of them are actually innocent. So I'm working on it. I'm patching my wounds up mentally, and just taking in this freedom. Sometimes I just walk. And I love driving when nobody in the car. I just get in the car and drive. You know, so it's all good, man. I'm enjoying the freedom. I'm enjoying just being able to be in a fight to make a difference in the change, especially on ground zero in Philadelphia, because this is definitely ground zero.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
I want to
Mr.
say
Eric,
salute y'all network too, because y'all play so much of an important role. Because once upon a time we didn't have no voice, so the media that's speaking truth to power today, we nothing without y'all, because we didn't have no voice 20 years ago. We had these issues 30 years ago, but y'all chose to be on time with time, right? And rooted with the people, whereas y'all speaking truth to power. That's major, because without y'all giving us a voice, injustice thrive on silencing the victims. So I definitely salute y'all network, and I appreciate it. Anytime you call me on, you call me back anytime. I'll find the time if I'm driving, set my Zoom up or whatever. Just call them if you want to call me back on the show. I'm with it. Definitely.
well, I
Definitely.
appreciate you, Mr. Riddick. We've been doing this series for over 2 years now, and
Yes.
sometimes we're booked a month and a half in advance, which is crazy because we shouldn't be. We shouldn't have so many people to talk to, but we do. And if we have folks to talk to, we got to make sure we spread the word. So once again, Mr. Eric Riddick spent nearly 30 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit in Philadelphia. If you want to donate to his Cash App, it is $free Eric, just like it sounds, ERIC, Riddick, RIDDICK. And you can also go to his website for his foundation, erfoundation19.com. He is still fighting to be officially exonerated because that's how crazy the system is.